Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to be able to enter into the debate and participate with respect to the contents of the throne speech, and maybe even to do a little correcting in terms of what we just heard. Mr. Speaker, though, I would like to say that, as many of my colleagues in the legislature have done, that I will not soon forget this speech from the throne. They're all fairly significant days in the life of a legislature in a province, but this one in particular was memorable for all of the wrong reasons. For the tragedy that was unfolding in Ottawa, the terrorist attack that happened there, that took the life of one of Canada's finest, and the attempts that were made on Parliament Hill. And Mr. Speaker, I'm already on the record with respect to those events, but I just again want to thank all of those in the Canadian Forces who each and every day are prepared to take the night shift, frankly, on the wall, Mr. Speaker, for all of us to guard our securities and to guard our freedoms, and also to acknowledge those members of the Canadian Forces that were here that day and that participate in our throne speech ceremonies on a regular basis. I'm very glad that we made the decision that we would go ahead, that particular important day in democracy in Saskatchewan needed to proceed. We needed to do so with the company of those armed forces members. We need to do so in the company of the RCMP and police officers and members of our judiciary, who are truly the conveyors of the rule of law. I'm glad that we were able to do that and bring forward a speech from the throne on that very tragic day. Mr. Speaker, we've had debates like this before, obviously on an annual basis, when governments bring forward this speech from the throne, and we all know that in the past at least, Convention has these speeches as being really general in nature, not a lot of information. I remember sitting through a number of those while I was in opposition and hearing hearing all of them, at least from 1999 forward, from the government through to 2007, from the NDP government of the day. And there would be the odd one that would have some specific details as to what the government was planning, but mostly they were platitudes. And Mr. Speaker, I know that we have erred on the side of detail in all the speech from the thrones that we have done. We have a lot of specifics that were announced in the speech from the throne, and we've seen them further develop here, even in the recent days. In fact, it was the speech from the throne that referenced the fact that we were going to go to the public on a consultation on the future of liquor retailing in the province. Mr. Speaker, that announcement happened today, that the release of an initial report and then the invitation by the minister responsible for the public to participate occurred. Mr. Speaker, we are not proposing any further changes now as a government, but we want to hear from Saskatchewan people, and we're going to take their advice as we develop our own platform to present to the people before the next election. We have made one change that's still consistent with the promise we made in the last campaign. In the last campaign, Mr. Speaker, we said we would not sell to private interest liquor stores in Saskatchewan. And we have not. We've kept the promise. We intend to continue to keep that commitment. But what we did say is that because of a growing Saskatchewan, growth that is record-breaking in almost every sense, there are new neighbourhoods popping up. And there's a demographic demand for new retail outlets, for new stores. And so we've said, rather than take government money and build a liquor store or pay the lease costs of a brand new liquor store, we should rather, Mr. Speaker, put that out to the public and let them apply, let them make a proposal, the companies, I should say, interested entrepreneurs and companies, and get into the liquor retailing business. And we've seen that unfold very successfully, Mr. Speaker. In fact, the first company, or in this case cooperative, to actually be successful bidding for a retail store, and I was there, it's a beautiful retail store, was the Saskatoon Co-op. And so, Mr. Speaker, the irony, of course, for members of the House here is that of all the members in the legislature, the first owners of a new private liquor store is the member for Saskatoon Centre and the leader of the opposition and all the Saskatoon members over there, because they're all members of the co-op. And I remember the ads growing up. We all own the co-op. The NDP members now are in the private liquor business, and I want to congratulate them on that. And I know going forward, should the Regina-based cooperative be successful on a retail basis with respect to a future private store, the deputy leader, the member for Rosemount, may well, I assume he's a member of the co-op here in Regina, and he would then be a owner of a private liquor store, and I think that's reasonable. It is 2014 after all, and by the way, we think through his proxy, we do believe that the co-op is a responsible retailer of liquor. We have heard a debate in this province around liquor retailing that I hope the NDP can help with. We have seen union leaders, not members, leaders, public sector union leaders, come forward and call out organizations like the Co-op or Sobeys, call them out in terms of whether or not they will be as responsible in selling alcohol as a union member in a government store. I hope I have not heard the NDP whisper one word about this, by the way. When they could have stood up for the co-ops in rural Saskatchewan that have special vendors, when they could have stood up for the franchise owner of Bumper to Bumper in Kyle, who's also got a liquor franchisee given to him by the New Democrats, when they could have stood up for the Saskatoon Co-op against these public sector union leaders' allegations that somehow now the private sector, the co-op, is going to be irresponsible and sell liquor to minors, there was silence over there. The reason that they were silent then and have a strange intervention today in the wake of the minister's report is because they are so ideologically hidebound on so many issues. In the throne speech, we talked about moving this province forward. We talked about the need to innovate, to do things differently, and including in healthcare. We've already used private clinics, for example, to reduce the surgery wait list. Maybe we need to have a debate about the role of private diagnostics. They're not interested in that debate. We wanted it today to engage them in a debate about how we sell liquor in the province. They don't want to have that debate. They're ideologically hidebound to this notion from I don't know what year that the only way that you can sell alcohol in a major urban centre in Saskatchewan is to have a government store and a unionized staff. By the way, Mr. Speaker, I would point out, I'm not sure if it's RWDSU or which union it is, but in the case of the co-op, and I think Sobeys, those are also unionized. Those are unionized liquor stores. And in the case of the co-op, I know I asked the question about what's being paid there. It's very comparable, frankly, to what was being paid by the government in terms of the stores that are there. So it's one thing to be ideologically hidebound to issues, whether it's private clinics shortening the wait list in a public system, or whether it's the private sector being allowed to retail more liquor in the province. It's quite another to just sit on your hands, to not say a word and stand up and defend those many small mom-and-pop operations that even under the NDP were given a franchise to sell liquor, and now the new organizations like the Co-op and Sobeys and others that will come along who are earnest and who are working to be responsible. Mr. Speaker, I think the NDP said a lot by their silence in this regard. So ideologically hidebound, so tied to union leadership that they simply refuse to stand up for what is right when it is so very clearly right, Mr. Speaker. So that was one. That's just one example of what is in the throne speech in terms of a very specific commitment made, already kept by the Minister of SLGA, and now we're into a public debate. There were many other specifics in the speech from the throne, Mr. Speaker, and they have been well canvassed, I think, by colleagues on this side of the House. I'm not going to go down the list. I would just say in a general sense that the speech from the throne advances the government's agenda in a general way, with the specifics that I've referenced are there and that my colleagues have already spoken to. And the plan or the agenda of the government has remained unchanged since 2007. And that is, first and foremost, our duty is to the economy, first and foremost. Even ahead of social services, one might ask. Even ahead of long-term care issues, one might ask. Even ahead of education or post-secondary issues, one might ask. Our answer is yes. Even ahead of those issues, because, Mr. Speaker, the only way this province will be able to afford progress for seniors who need long-term care, for the disabled who need the dignity of a residence, for lower tuition fees for students, for better health care, for more highways. The only way to do any of that is to have access to public funds that come from a tax base that must always be broadened and not necessarily deepened, but broadened in terms of what can be afforded to the government treasury to do these things. And so it is the prime directive of the government of Saskatchewan that we would make sure that we were doing no harm to the economy, certainly, that we were not getting in the way of those who create economic wealth, who create the tax base that funds all of the things that they demand every day in question period, and frankly that our MLAs do on behalf of their constituents as well, the things that we want on the quality of life side of the equation. So this speech from the throne had a specific offering, and we'll have more details on it down the road, of another new growth tax incentive that will be revenue neutral to the province. This tax relief comes on top of reductions we have made to the small business tax, historic provincial income tax reductions through the basic exemption and the child tax credit, historic property tax reductions, Mr. Speaker. On top of that, what we're saying in this speech from the throne is we have to send a message to our exporters here and those that are in other jurisdictions that might want to come to the province, that if they do, there might be an incentive tied to each job they create related to exporting products around the world from Saskatchewan. I can tell the members of this House that Saskatchewan today, in terms of our provincial counterparts, is the highest per capita trader, exporter of any province in Canada. This is a relatively new development. We've always been pretty effective at exporting, but in the last number of years we've seen almost exponential growth in exports, a lot into Asia, but also growth into the United States of America. We've also seen a diversification in the economy. The leader of the opposition, he likes to talk a lot about eggs in baskets. And I think what he means by that is that the government, well, in the industry, the economy should be diversifying. I think that's what he means by that, because he's never actually explained it. He just says it a lot. It's easy in a scrum, and frankly, the economy is not the NDP's forte, so they're going to cling to any phrase they find, and eggs in baskets happens to be the one. Well, here's the good news, Mr. Speaker. If you take a look at what's happened over to our economy since 2007, we have seen a significant diversification. We have seen greater job growth in areas that are export related, in the innovation sector, Mr. Speaker, in financial services, than in the natural resource sector. In fact, the percentage of job growth that we've had, and I think it's 70,000 new jobs since 2007, 70,000 of them. The percentage from the natural resource sector, I'm going to stand to be corrected, but it's under 20%, Mr. Speaker, and the growth has come in other areas. We need to do more, though, to diversify, and that's why in the speech from the throne we said, we're going to provide some incentives for those who are exporters, agricultural value add, manufacturers, those on the innovation side that are developing technologies for export might want to take a look at these incentives in terms of their plans for future investments or locating of new plants, and we'll work hard to promote that as we have. It is an indication that the economy, though, Mr. Speaker, for us remains the #1 priority for our government, because it's the only way to pay for the things that we prize. Interesting to see what's happening right now in terms of oil prices. I want to comment on them around the world, because my seatmate was very interested in the throne speech debate. He's also very interested, as the finance minister, in what's going on in terms of the province's revenue. I want to say that it is a good thing that our economy is diversified, because even as we see the cycling of resource prices, we know, and we have seen in the past, the economy continue to move forward. We've seen 2% and 3% GDP, even at a time when revenues might have fallen because potash sales weren't there or oil sales weren't there. So I want to offer an encouraging word to Saskatchewan people today, that in our province, and we've seen it in spades since 2007, the Treasury's health, the finances of the province in terms of revenue, are quite a different matter than the economy. You can have lower commodity prices and continued growth. That has happened on at least 2 occasions for a sustained period of time since 2007. And for however long we see oil prices down a little bit, we're going to watch the budget carefully. We're going to ensure it continues to be a balanced summary budget, and the auditor wants to see that summary budget, I would say, and the Minister of Finance is nodding his head. We're going to continue to balance it, but the message is the economy is strong, and we're going to do what we can, including the new growth incentives, to always be trying to ensure that the economy stays strong, knowing that government doesn't create the jobs, but it certainly sets the climate, and it should follow a policy of do no harm. This is significantly different than the economic policies that used to exist for a very long time in the province, where much harm was done to the economy, where the government consisted with people's money, with the taxpayers' money, involuntary venture capitalists, I would call them, insisted on picking winners and losers. Every year the list would be long. The Minister of the Economy has read some of them into the House, and I know the member for Wood River often highlights that list, and I forgot how long the list is. I mean, .coms and an auction company to compete against eBay and potatoes and all manner of businesses where they took taxpayers' money and they picked winners and losers. And the bad news, Mr. Speaker, is that when the NDP pick winners and losers, they get it half right. We got a bunch of losers, a long list of them, that did two things. One, lost a bunch of taxpayers' money, and did another thing, cast a chill over the economic climate of this province. That's not the kind of environment businesses want, that entrepreneurs want. They want to know they've got a level playing field. They want to know that taxes are competitive. They want to know government's taking care of infrastructure, and then leave me alone and stay out of the economy. That's the change that's happened, and it's represented in the speech from the throne as well. Now, that's not to say that the throne speech does not, and the government's plan do not continue to focus in the areas that are very important to us in healthcare and education, advanced education and highways. And I just want to touch briefly on it. It's important that we summarize some of the progress in this area, because we hear from members opposite a lot about the record of the government. We found out yesterday that we ought to really check the facts. I mean, I think we knew that before. The Minister of Health has been busy in sessions recently fact-checking the health critic, leader of the opposition's questions that he's been getting, because often the premise has little to do with the facts and the truth, the premise of the questions being asked. We should probably talk about what happened yesterday again, just briefly to make that point, because I don't know if I've seen anything like it, where they lead off on smart meters, as we'd expect, with the leader of the opposition selectively quoting from the report that, of course, we commissioned and had released. So there's a pretty good chance we know what's in it. But somehow he leads off and selectively quotes, and his smoking gun question at that point is, who actually ordered the smart meters to be removed? And Mr. Speaker, he then read half of a quote from the report that says the board was looking at removing the smart meters. The same quote in the same report that he read, and there's two different occasions where it occurs. In fact, three. It's in the executive summary as well. Notes that the government ordered the meters to be removed, and the board was heading that direction. But of course, the decision of the government was made absent of advice from SAS power officials. Now, as he's wont to do, he got that answer, I think, once and twice, but pressed on, Mr. Speaker, because if you don't have the truth on your side, you should just keep asking the questions, apparently. Later in question period, something more grievous happened. And I have not seen the like of that. I can only imagine what would have happened. I was in opposition. If, as a critic, I would have done what the member for Nutana, with the blessing of the leader of the NDP, this new and fresh leader of the NDP, did yesterday. She stood in the House, and I read the quote in question period today. I'm not sure if we have it. Oh yeah, here it is. Happily, I still have it. Mr. Speaker, here's what she said. She said, and I quote, "Mr. Speaker, when I asked in committee for updates on how the smart meter program was working, the answers I received included, quote, it's going quite well, actually," end quote. She's now quoting the answer. "The project is running according to plan." That's the end of that quote. She continues yesterday. "Not once did the minister bother to reveal," and then on she goes. You see what's happened there? Something that's not unparliamentary, but a clear inference on her part, because she's a lawyer, she would know how to word this correctly. A clear implication that it was the minister that said those words.
Shameful.
A clear implication that she was actually not, that she was asking about whether or not the smart meters were working in their test project. So, Mr. Speaker, we checked the answer. And of course, the viewers will know that everything that's said in this assembly, when it's in session, including at the committee level, is recorded. And thank goodness with this bunch over there, Mr. Speaker. Here's the fact of the matter. She did ask questions in committee about smart meters on the day she was referencing. She asked questions here. Well, here it is. Here's the question from the same member. She's asking specifically about the budget. Is it on budget? Have there been extra costs involved with that as well? That's her question. She's not asking about whether the meters work or how the test worked. That was her implication yesterday, though. She was asking if it was on budget. A perfectly reasonable question, but perfectly reasonable question, but one that she ought to remember, especially if she's going to change the question then, or her recollection of it in the House on her feet on the record. So she wasn't asking at all about whether the pilot was working in terms of the technology. She was saying, is it on budget? And what's worse, Mr. Speaker, is the quote she read yesterday, with the clear inference, and she knows this, that it was the minister that said the reply, which is here now, that it's going quite well, actually, was Robert Watson, not the minister. Now, usually when the NDP, well, not always, but sometimes when the NDP do something like that in question period, they run out and they provide the paper for it to the media. I did think it passing strange yesterday that it didn't happen, and now we know why.
Was it true? Yep.
We know why.
Blink light.
It is exactly the kind of tactic we saw from Mr. Lingenfelter.
Piece it together.
I remember the day when I actually heard the ad they put together. They would come and monitor our scrums. Mr. Lingenfelter's people and Mr. Broughton was involved in the NDP leader was involved in developing their campaign plan. So was the deputy leader. So was the member for Regina Lakeview, sanctioning, I think the member for Newtown as well, sanctioning this tactic. They would monitor a scrum. They would take the tape away from something that I'd said. They'd splice words together to make me say something and by the way, I can get enough trouble on my own, but they spliced my words together to make something that, to make me say in an ad that I never did say, and they paid for that.
Yeah, they got caught.
Because they got caught. Right. And people said, have your debates in there. Ask your questions in there. That's what it's for. But do it in a manner that is respectful. Do it in a manner that is truthful, Mr. Speaker. That's what the people of Saskatchewan would have us do. And I think some of us thought, well, with Mr. Lingenfelter gone, that's going to change. Nope. Wrong. Nope.
Yesterday.
Wrong.
Same old NDP.
It's the same old NDP. This new leader practices the same tactics as Mr. Lingenfelter when it comes to playing games in this legislature. I know that honourable member from Newtown is an honourable member. And while there was no unparliamentary infraction here, because the wording she made was very careful, I know her to be a good person. And I hope that she would at least consider a private note to the minister.
Apologize.
That just apologizes and says, you know, we went pretty far there. That was not the right thing to do, and that's not who I am, and I shouldn't perhaps have listened to the deputy leader or the leader and got up at the end of question period and done something like that. Mr. Speaker, the speech from the throne also references education, that we are going to continue to build schools in the province, that we are going to continue with the P3 model. I think it's fair to say that our government will not continue with the P3 model for any ideological reasons. If we cannot get the number of applicants we need, the number of responses to the request for proposal that ensures the cost will be lower, we're not going to go ahead. We'll build it the conventional way. Again, compare that to the NDP, who are just ideologically opposed to innovative ways to fund capital. And Mr. Speaker, I would just say this. The NDP have said, well, we're going to do it the way that's always been done in the province, and never mind what's happening around the world or the rest of the country. I'll tell you what, those communities that want schools, including the members' constituency, the leader's constituency of the NDP, Massey Place, under the NDP would never get a school, because the money simply couldn't be assembled to build them as fast as we need them because of rapid growth. So, if we can get multiple proponents, if we can ensure the cost is lower, we're going to go ahead. And Mr. Speaker, the good news on P3s is we've been seeing some hope around the Sask Hospital and the corrections facility. There are some early indications that we can do this more cost effectively than otherwise. And we saw it front and center in Swift-Current for the new long-term care facility there, where costs are going to come in $16 million less than had we gone the NDP route to build it. We're going to actually get the project done and build open 225 new beds. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that in education we're going to continue to invest in capital, and we're going to continue to support the operating budget of our school boards. In advanced education, the record of the government stands, Mr. Speaker, and I think it bears repeating. We talk about the adult basic education list in the speech from the throne and eliminating it. There's more resources there, and people ought to take comfort that we actually do the things we say we would do in advanced education, because at the University of Regina, their operating funding under our government's up 40%. And at the University of Saskatchewan, their operating funding under our government is up 65%. And capital funding in this province is way up. They can take us at our word when we talk about the investment that's needed in the post-secondary sector. 1,178 new student residences in the province. Project at the University of Regina. Mr. Speaker, that is a 2,354% increase. Which says two things. One, that we're building a lot of student residences, and two, they didn't build any. They didn't build any. I mean, we had pressures even before the growth happened at our campuses. Nothing from the NDP again. Lots of talk. Lots of requests. But, Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to support that. Highways. We talked in the speech from the throne about infrastructure in general. I want to say for the record, I traveled a lot this summer, first to go to communities affected by the flood, and we are mindful of them in the legislature, in the session, and in the budgeting process, and thank goodness we have a rainy day fund, and thank goodness we've made improvements to the disaster assistance program, arguably with more needed, and thank goodness we're responding as quickly as we can to those needs. But we travel the province in the case of the touring around for the floods, and then just generally as we would go around the province. For example, we would meet in communities, and sometimes it'd be a political event that we would actually be going to. A picnic, we held them all around the province, and I noted that they were successful, and the NDP actually started doing some picnics. The difference, by the way, with their picnics is that I remember one particular invitation from Aaron Weir, who ran for the leadership. He wanted to host a picnic in Regina, just like our picnics, and I think the invitation went something like, look, come to the picnic, but you can bring your own food, and we don't have any chairs or anything, and if you could bring some toys for the kids to play with, and oh, by the way, we're going to have to rent the park, so could you bring some money to help pay for that? It's an interesting it's an interesting picnic. But, Mr. Speaker, as we traveled the province, wherever we were, I heard about highways. There is an understanding, colleagues out there, as you know, that we have invested historically in highways. They know, without maybe getting into the specific numbers, that it's about $655 million this year, and a record. And it broke the record that was set last year, which broke the record that was set the year before that, which broke the record that was set the year before that. Successive historic investments in highways, and yet still, because of the amount of thin membrane surfaces, because of the amount of projects out there, and I must say because of an infrastructure deficit left behind by our friends, we have much more work to do. And more than that, we need to make sure we're doing it as effectively as possible, and so we've asked the Minister of Highways, and she's working carefully with the Legislative Secretary, who I want to thank on the record today, traveling across this province, meeting with our MLAs and reeves and mayors and businesses, and looking at more thin membrane surface than perhaps even anyone in the Ministry of Highways has done, on the officials. The member for Cut Knife Turtle, I want to thank him for that work. Now, we got to do something for that work with that work. We've got to find out how we can do better in terms of highways investment. The good news, Mr. Speaker, is that it's not those folks on the other side that are in power. Again, if people are looking for hope that maybe we'd keep this commitment to continue to invest in highways and do a little better and find ways to innovate and make the pavement go a little farther, they should take comfort in the record that we've had in terms of those investments and budgets, and they should be grateful that the other guys aren't in power, because not only did they not do a lot when they were in power, but the Leader of the Opposition was just on his feet talking about his 25 points that he wanted to see in the speech from the throne. This was his test. These 25 things needed to be addressed by the government, either in the speech from the throne or in the session that ensues. Guess what was missing? Not a word about highways. I hear the leader say he's traveling around the province, but I wonder if he is. Because if he is traveling the province, first thing he will hear in rural Saskatchewan, they have other concerns, but the first thing he will hear are highways. This particular TMS, that particular road, what are you doing on rural roads, how are you helping SARM? He'll hear it if he's doing it, if they're meeting with rural Saskatchewan, frankly, and people in the cities as well. How do you come out with your 25 things you demand from the government in the speech from the throne and forget highways? We ought not to be surprised. There are 9 of them sitting over there because, Mr. Speaker, they spent years forgetting about rural Saskatchewan. They spent years. And so we know we have work to do. It. You know, right now there's a by-election going on in Lloydminster. Here's an example of an investment turnaround. The Minister of Highways tells me that since 2007, the amount our government has invested in highways in the Lloydminster constituencies is up 853%. Which again means that we're investing and arguably need to do more, and they really didn't do much of anything at all. Mr. Speaker, the throne speech debate affords us the opportunity to hear both sides spell out what their vision is for Saskatchewan, what plans they have to fulfill that vision. And I heard the NDP suggest a few things in their 25-point thing, and I give them credit for that. But, Mr. Speaker, we could well be 1 year away from an election, from a general election in the province. Here's how that could work. We all know that the election right now, as it stands, is set for April of 2016. But that's predicated on the fact that our original set date in November of 2015 had to be moved because the federal election will occur on that same time. We contacted the Prime Minister, who indicated they were going to continue with their set date, and so provinces in Canada have moved theirs. But it could be, it's happened in the past, that the federal government chooses to go sooner. They may choose to call an election for Canadians sooner than that. If it happens, we're going to be right back at the original date set in law, the first Monday in November 2015. That's not very long from now. It's not very long from now in terms of having to work very hard in the months ahead and in the 28 days for all of us to again try to earn the trust of Saskatchewan people. To try to present them with the record of our government, highlight what we think worked and also the things that we need to do a little better on, but present those specific things like we did in the speech from the throne and in the context of a vision for Saskatchewan. We need to do that, Mr. Speaker, but I would argue so do they. We have a new leader of their party after the Lingenfelter years, and we would understand that he would take some time to simply be an opposition leader, hold the government accountable. That's part of the role. But as you get closer to an election, we did this, by the way, prior to 2007, you need to be able to offer more than complaints. You must offer more than criticism. You must offer more than the demand for more expenditure. You must offer also how you would pay for the expenditure. And I believe, it's good for us on this side, I think these folks have missed an amazing opportunity, even in the speech from the throne debate, to start to do that. Because I don't think, given the track record of the NDP in education, healthcare, highways, and the economy, I don't think the people of the province are just prepared to accept from them, trust us, we'll do better than the other guys. The track record's not there, Mr. Speaker. In fact, the record would speak to something else entirely. I want to just conclude, if I can, by referencing the theme of the speech from the throne, which was keeping Saskatchewan strong. And the throne speech lays out what we mean by that, but I just want to share an email, if I can. It's a long one, so bear with me, Mr. Speaker, as I read it into the record. It says, and I quote Mr. Wall, "I need to tell you a story that happened to my son just a week ago and how it has changed his view of Saskatchewan. Here's what happened. My son's name is Dylan Stanley." By the way, Mr. Speaker, I emailed the writer and asked if I could please use it in the House. And so I do that now. Here's what happened. My son's name is Dylan Stanley. He lives in Regina and is dating a very nice lady, Carly Namath. Dylan was working out of town when on Friday, October 10, Carrie called him to state that her grandfather had passed away of a heart attack while doing his harvest at Siemens, Saskatchewan. Upon hearing this, Dylan returned home, changed and headed to the farm to assist with the harvest and helping out Carly's grandma and uncle. Dylan is only 18. He was expected to help when I spoke to him. He was excited to help, Mr. Speaker, sorry. When I spoke to him, I asked if they needed help. Dylan said, "Dad, it's amazing to see all the help here. There are 5 combines, 2 semis, 4 grain carts, and a mess of people, local farmers and the staff from the K store who took the time to come out and help with the harvest, the whole community helping farmers and families and friends, taking the time to miss Thanksgiving to help get the fields done. The harvest was completed on Wednesday, October 15th by all of the people that came to help this family. They're going to say goodbye to Robert Hills on Thursday, October 16th. Robert Hillis, in Siemens. I just wanted to tell you about these heroes in our province and to the heroes that helped get this done. This is what being a true Saskatchewanian, I think he means, is all about. My son is proud to be a part of this, as I am sending you this message of how in need, when in need, we come together as family and work hard to get harvest done. I too am very proud to be from Saskatchewan. I don't know if they're watching today, but these folks probably deserve a hand from all members in the House for that. Some people might think when a Saskatchewan party with sort of the free enterprise-oriented party talks about keeping Saskatchewan strong, that we would mean the economy. And while it's a prime directive, while it's a top priority and important, it's never what we meant. When we talk about keeping Saskatchewan strong, when we talk about the strength of Saskatchewan, we've always been talking about people like Dylan, the people of Saskatchewan. That's why on the last page of the speech from the throne it says, Saskatchewan is strong. The strength comes from our people, their hard work, their determination, their ingenuity, and their generosity. We owe those people the best possible government we can provide. Not perfect, but the very best possible government that we could provide. That we would offer an economic vision and then a plan to help it achieve its potential, and then to invest in these things that I've talked about today. That is what we need to be mindful of. Notwithstanding what comes from over there, colleagues, notwithstanding, Mr. Speaker, what we hear in terms of the partisan back and forth, this side of the House will remember that our duty is to those people, to those farmers, to people in the cities who desire for their province the very best and want from their government its very best. Mr. Speaker, that is exactly what we are going to work hard to give them every single day. We have honor to try, and that's why I support the speech from the throne.